Imagine being promoted to the second most powerful woman in China, but you can't stand up to receive it. You're dying, suffocating on your own phlegm, and you've been lying here for 24 days straight. You're a woman who had power, respect, and love, but whose life, body, and legacy were ultimately fragile and uncontrollable. And nearly 200 years later, your body would be stripped naked and thrown into muddy water by looters. Yet somehow, modern audiences know you as a mass murderer of children. But history describes the exact opposite. So who are you really? And why does your story end in such a strange entanglement of honor, horror, grief, and destruction? Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Rose, and I cover deep dives into history and the lives of the past. And today, we're going one step deeper into our series on the women in Qianlong's court, and looking at a figure who is often misunderstood, frequently misidentified, and surprisingly powerful. We're talking about Gao Huang Gui Fei, or Imperial Noble Consort Gao. And her modern-day characterization has essentially no basis in the historical records. So let's set the record straight. Lady Gao was born in 1711 during the reign of the Yongzhen Emperor. Her family were Han Chinese, originally from Liaoyang, which is now Liaoning province. And here's the first thing that most people get wrong about her. They assume that because her family were bondservants, that she came from poverty or obscurity. The Baoyi bondservant families attached to the imperial household departments were hereditary retainers who had served the imperial family directly for generations. They were not common servants. They had the ability to work their way up to being powerful administrators that would have made most regular Manchu nobles envious. And her great-grandfather surrendered to the founder of the later Jin, the dynasty that would become the Qing. And that was a smart bet, because the family had been collecting on it ever since. But the person who truly elevated the Gao family was her father, Gao Bin, and he was genuinely remarkable, not just in the way that court records flatter officials, but in a way that we can actually verify. He rose from managing imperial textile workshops to overseeing the Grand Canal and the Yellow River, two of the most dangerous and technically demanding systems in the empire. He later became Minister of Personnel, Grand Secretary, and a member of the Grand Council itself. So Lady Gao wasn't born into obscurity. She was born into a family standing right at the edge of power, close enough to touch it, but not yet fully inside of it. The Baoyi families participated in a separate selection process from the main imperial consort selection, and it was how young women from these families entered the service of the imperial household, or the household of the princes. Lady Gao entered this system and was assigned to serve the household of Hongli, the fourth son of the Yongzhen Emperor, the young man who would one day become the Qianlong Emperor. She was categorized, at least initially, as a serving maid. Now imagine what that looks like from the inside. A young woman from a family that was powerful by bondservant standards, but still fundamentally in service. Entering a prince's household, learning its rhythms, its personalities, its hierarchies, and learning specifically the personality of the prince himself. Something would happen in that household that can't fully be explained by politics alone. On March 1st, 1734, the Yongzhen Emperor personally issued an edict elevating Lady Gao directly from a serving maid to the secondary consort of Prince Hongli. The historical records describe this as Chaoba, an exceptional elevation. She skipped the rank of an ordinary concubine entirely. The Yongzhen Emperor's hand in this was extraordinary. It meant that the emperor had noticed her, or more likely, he had noticed that his son had noticed her, and that whatever this woman was to his son, it was worth formalizing. She was promoted not by the man she served, but by his father. So let's sit with what that actually means. She went from being a maid, the lowest category of woman in the household, to secondary consort overnight. That's not just a promotion, that is a complete and utter transformation of identity. And her story is only just beginning. The following year, the Yongzhen Emperor died, and Prince Hongli ascended the throne as the Qianlong Emperor in September of 1735. And one of the very first things he did, within weeks of taking power while the court was still technically in mourning, was to issue an edict elevating Lady Gao to Gao Gui Fei, the third highest rank in the imperial harem, sitting just below the empress and the imperial noble consort. At the same time, he elevated Gao's entire clan. They were formally lifted out of Baoyi status and placed into the proper Manchu-bordered yellow banner, with their Han surname Gao being changed to Gaojia. Her body, her rank, and her place in the harem all changed the social and political identity of her entire clan. But here's a fascinating tidbit of information that shows Qianlong's inner workings. He also sent a message to her father. And the message said, "Even though your daughter is waiting on me, you should not be harboring any ill intentions. This will not be tolerated by national law. If you serve the nation well, with sincerity and integrity, I will not refrain from giving rewards. But neither will I show favoritism to avoid criticism." When you sit with that, it's extraordinary. The young Qianlong Emperor, just weeks on the throne, felt he needed to preemptively warn his new noble consort's father against leveraging his daughter's position. What does that tell us? It tells us that the emperor was deeply aware of the political stakes at play, that he genuinely cared about Lady Gao, enough to protect the legitimacy of their marriage from the very start, and that he intended to enforce a strict separation between his private love and his public duties. Decades later, that warning would prove to be a promise that he kept at the most brutal possible cost. But we'll get there in a bit, so make sure you stick around for it because I promise you that it's worth it. For nearly a decade, from 1735 to 1745, Lady Gao occupied a position in the imperial court that was unique in and of itself. She was the only Gui Fei in the entire harem. The title Gui Fei didn't even need a distinguishing character added to it. She was simply known as Gui Fei. At the annual imperial family banquets, the records are clear with her treatment. She sat at the top table, directly beside the emperor, receiving dishes that were identical to the empress. And in the language of Qing court, where seating and food was precise and controlled, this was the emperor saying that these two women were equally close to me. And from what the records tell us, the empress and Lady Gao genuinely were close. Not as rivals, but as something more like partners. The relationship between Lady Gao and Empress Fucha is one of the most misrepresented dynamics in modern drama. In the story of Yangtze Palace and Ruyi's royal love in the palace, the Consort Gao character is the scheming antagonist who's constantly plotting against the empress and manipulating the court. But the actual historical records describe their relationship as being that of devoted sisters. Contemporary documents, including the emperor's own funeral oration for Lady Gao, describe her as approaching the empress with consistent humility and grace, never overstepping, never undermining her authority. They managed the inner court together, as a team, and when the empress suffered personal grief, such as the loss of her two beloved sons, it's recorded that Lady Gao was the one that came to comfort her, who urged her to take care of her health, and who was present in her grief and supportive in her recovery. And after both of them died, Lady Gao in 1745 and Empress Fucha 3 years later in 1748, the Qianlong Emperor did something that tells you everything you need to know about how he understood their relationship. He transformed Changchunggong into a permanent memorial. He placed their portraits together and their personal effects side by side. In his grief, they were inseparable. Now, what strikes me the most about Lady Gao's decade as Gui Fei is how much active labor it actually required from her. She wasn't simply the emperor's favorite consort. She was effectively one of two women running the internal administration of the largest palace complex on the earth. She attended on the Empress Dowager Chongqing, the emperor's mother, regularly enough to earn the Empress Dowager's warm personal praise. She managed disputes among the lower consorts, she managed the palace resources, and most importantly, she counseled. And she counseled rather well. When the emperor was anxious about agricultural harvests, the record says that she would come to his side to comfort him. That is such an insightful domestic detail from their marriage that we can see today. Not she was beautiful or she served me well, but when I was burdened, she stood beside me. As a true partner really would. But despite all of that, she bore no children. Not a single one, not even a failed pregnancy. For all of her rank, her favor, and time in the imperial harem, what did she have to show for it? Whether this was connected to her reoccurring illness or to some other cause that the records don't name, we sadly will never be able to know. But the emperor's attachment to her, nonetheless, did not waver despite her inability to produce an heir. And there's a quieter thread running through Lady Gao's story, and it's worth pausing on, because for all of her rank and position, she seems to have been ill, seriously and chronically ill for much of her adult life. The sources describe her condition as tenji, which is often translated to a phlegm illness. Now that's frustratingly vague for modern readers, so let me offer 3 possibilities that historians might consider today, while being very clear that we do not know, and we cannot know for certain what it actually was. Theory 1, a chronic respiratory disease, something like a severe bronchial illness or tuberculosis, that cycled through periods of remission and relapse. Theory 2, a systematic imbalance, not just the lungs, but the whole body. And theory 3, a combination of recurrent health collapses that weakened her over time and may have also affected her ability to bear children. We can't prove any of those fully, but we do know that this illness came back. And when it came back with a vengeance. So fast forward to February 1745. It's the first day of the first lunar month of Qianlong's 10th year in reign. The Forbidden City is alive and breathing. Red lanterns, the sound of firecrackers and music, the smell of incense coiling up through courtyard after courtyard. It's New Year's Day, and it's supposed to be one of the most auspicious, joyful days of the year. But Lady Gao's chronic illness relapses, critically. The emperor would have known, from the way the palace physicians were speaking to him, what this relapse meant. She had been seriously ill for years, and this was the illness finally arriving at its conclusion. He had 24 more days. And on February 23rd, 1745, he issued an emergency edict. He elevated Lady Gao from Gao Gui Fei to Gao Huang Gui Fei, imperial noble consort, second in the entire dynasty, just below the empress. This practice had a name in Chinese tradition, chongxi, blessings to drive away bad luck, promoting someone who was gravely ill, elevating them as if the act of elevation itself could reach into the body and argue with death. It was simultaneously a genuine expression of love and a ritual act of desperation. She was too ill to attend her own ceremony that would have formalized her new title. She couldn't walk to receive the seals of her own rank. And she lied there in her palace while the court went through the motions of an investiture that she couldn't even witness. And then 2 days later, on the 25th of February, 1745, on a day known as Tiancang Day, to fill the Granary Festival, a day that was supposed to celebrate abundance, Lady Gao drew her final breath and died. She was approximately 33 years old. The next day, the emperor bestowed her posthumous title, Huixian Huang Gui Fei. Hui meaning a gentle quality with a penetrating intelligence, and Xian meaning inner virtue established and perfected. He could have chosen anything, but he chose the words that meant she was wise and she was good. And here's the thing about grief. It has a tendency to find a container. And for the Qianlong Emperor, the container for his grief over Lady Gao was Tiancang Day, the very day that she died. Every year, on that day, he wrote poems about her and grieved. Not once or twice, but year after year, much in the same way he grieved for his first wife, Empress Fucha. If you want to learn more about Empress Fucha, check out my previous episode on her linked above. He composed a formal mourning poems series called Mourning Poems for Imperial Noble Consort Huixian, following the rhyme of Old Spring poems. And in it, he compared the two of them to paired swallows nesting on the rafters, to lines of geese flying together over a river, suddenly separated, one by death while the other was left behind. Grief often works like that, doesn't it? A day on the calendar becomes unusable, a festival becomes an anniversary, and a season becomes haunted with the ghost of the memories left behind. But what does that tell you about who she actually was? Her golden coffin rested in the imperial funeral palace for 7 years. Then, in 1748, Empress Fucha died suddenly while on an imperial southern tour. And in October 1752, with the attendance of Empress Nara and Huixian Huang Gui Fei, the two women were interred together into the Yuling mausoleum on the same day, in the same ceremony. The Yuling underground palace itself is extraordinary. It's a stone complex 177 feet underground with carved Buddhist imagery, Sanskrit, and Tibetan inscriptions. Chambers were built for the emperor, his empresses, and his most favored consorts. Out of all of the Qianlong consorts, only 5 were granted burial in his main mausoleum. Lady Gao, who was childless and dead at the age of 33, was one of them. And that tells you more plainly than any eulogy just how high she stood in his regard. Now, remember that warning the emperor sent to Gao Bin in 1735? Do not leverage your daughter's position. This will not be tolerated. He meant that as a serious warning. Gao Bin himself managed to hold the line. He died in office in 1755, 10 years after his daughter, with his reputation intact. The emperor even granted him a burial plot near the eastern Qing tombs, positioned so that father and daughter would be spiritually near each other for eternity. That's an act of tenderness towards a dead woman's dead father. But the Gao family had other branches. Lady Gao's brother, Gao Heng, rose to become the Langhuai salt controller, one of the most lucrative administrative positions in the entire dynasty, responsible for the salt monopoly trade across the Yangtze River basin. But by this stage, the salt administration was deeply corroded by corruption. Officials and merchants had been silently siphoning off extraordinary sums for generations. In 1768, investigators discovered a staggering deficit in the treasury under Gao Heng's tenure, somewhere in the vicinity of 10.71 million taels of silver. For reference on how bad that actually was, the Yuling Mausoleum, one of the most expensive tombs in Qing history, had cost roughly 1.7 million taels. The deficit was 6 times that. Gao Heng was identified as the chief culprit, and then something happened that reveals the emperor's character more sharply than almost anything else in this entire story. A man you may know, the Grand Secretary Fu Heng, who happened to be the younger brother of the beloved Empress Fucha, went to the emperor and reportedly begged for Gao Heng's life, out of respect for the memory of Consort Huixian. Fu Heng was perhaps the one person in the dynasty whose pleas on behalf of the condemned man might have actually worked. But it didn't. In fact, the emperor made sure to let Fu Heng know that nobody was above the law. The emperor is reported to have said, even if the empress's brothers committed these crimes, what would we do with them? He refused to pardon Gao's brother, and Gao Heng was sentenced to die and was swiftly beheaded. His property and monies were all confiscated, and his home was turned into a prince's residence. But the tragic downfall of her family didn't stop there. Years later, in 1778, Lady Gao's nephew, the son of Gao Heng, Gao Pu, was posted in Xinjiang, where he became entangled in an illicit trafficking scheme. At the time, all the jade was property of the emperor, so he was diverting imperial resources for personal profit. When the case was investigated, the emperor stated explicitly, Gao Pu is even worse than his father, Gao Heng. I cannot show leniency because he is the nephew of imperial noble consort Huixian. Gao Pu was executed in the same way as his father, by public beheading. But in a fate much darker than his father's, the emperor ordered that Gao Pu's body be fed to the dogs after the execution as a final mark of disgrace. That is a devastating sequence of loss. Brother executed, nephew executed, a woman who had been dead for years explicitly invoked and explicitly set aside as a reason for mercy. Whether the emperor's refusal to show mercy reflects well on him or not, I'll leave that for you to decide and debate in the comments. She was clearly a beloved woman who served, counseled, managed, and was trusted by the emperor, the empress, and the empress dowager because she was genuinely trustworthy. The real Consort Gao wielded immense influence. She just wielded it quietly. But it would be too clean for her story to end there. After all, I did warn you at the start that her story ended in a strange entanglement of honor, horror, grief, and destruction. So if you've stuck around, buckle up. We're going to jump forward to July 2nd, 1928, and I want you to put yourself in her place. You're standing in the dark. The air is stale and thick with the dust of 2 centuries. Outside, the summer heat of Hebei province is suffocating. But down here, 177 feet underground, it's freezing cold. You watch as soldiers jam dynamite into the crevices of a massive 3-ton marble door. A fuse is lit, and the doors blow open. The soldiers rush in waves. They aren't here for history, and they aren't here to pay you respects. They're here to loot your eternal resting place. They pry open the coffins one by one. They drag out the dry, preserved remains of the Qianlong Emperor. They drag out his 2 empresses, Empress Fucha and Empress Xiao Yichun. They strip their bodies naked in search of jade and gold, and then they throw them into the stagnant, muddy water accumulating on the tomb floor. Lady Gao had been dead for 183 years by this point. The emperor himself had been dead for over a century. The dynasty they both had served was gone, and her resting place for all that time was destroyed in a single afternoon. Then, on August 18, 1928, by the order of the last emperor of China, Pu Yi, a team finally entered the underground palace for survey and remediation. They found the chamber severely flooded. Groundwater had seeped through the blasted stone doors, and the coffins were floating. The skeletal remains of the 5 women and the emperor buried there were so thoroughly mixed and scattered by the looting that they could no longer be individually identified. They were reinterred together, communally and unnamed, into Qianlong's own inner coffin. The woman the emperor had honored with inclusion in his own tomb, whose portrait was preserved for years, and who he mourned the rest of his life, in the end could not physically be separated from the others. None of them could. So, what do you think about the story of Gao Huang Gui Fei? Which of the 3 theories do you think best fit her health issues? And what do you think about the emperor refusing to use her memory as a reason for mercy when her brother and nephew were condemned to die in such a brutal way? Does that make you admire him more or less? And what do you think she would have done had she been alive to see their demise? As always, drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one and would love to hear your thoughts on this. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button. It really does help the algorithm show this video to more history nerds like us. Subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss future videos. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, the more you know.